So Ram Kumar was someone who had always grown up in the hills. He was a young boy and grew up in Simla, went to school in Simla, had a very strong bond with his brother Nirmal Verma, who was much his junior, I think 4 or 5 years younger, but shared a very strong bond. He's mentioned stories to me of how they'd go on a long walk to school through apple orchards, undulating landscape to get to school. And then he continued that tradition like the British did of moving the summer capital. So from Delhi, every summer he'd move to Simla. So that sort of stayed with him for years, right through the 90s. Every summer, a couple of months, Ram Kumar would not be in Delhi. So you didn't visit Delhi in those years, in those months. And so I think that landscape has had a strong kind of impression on him and continues. He's got so many images that they just poured out over the years. So a lot of people generally term Ram Kumar's work as abstract, when actually it isn't abstract at all, it's a landscape. And even I couldn't really comprehend his landscapes totally, till there was a very young collector in the 80s by the name of Arvind Kanoria, who used to come to my dad, and he loved Ram Kumar's work, but didn't have the courage to tell his father that he had bought a work. So he selected a work from, if I'm not mistaken, the 1986 exhibition, and then paid my father in installments probably over a year. And then the painting stayed with us for another decade because he didn't have the courage to take it home and tell his father that he had bought it. And he could relate to Ram Kumar, and he'd always tell me, he used to go trekking in the hills in North India. And he said, I've seen this, I know this landscape, it's like I understand it. Till one day he came back with a set of black and white photographs, large format, about 4 or 5, and he put them on the table. This was in the 90s. And I looked at them and I said, my God, this is uncanny. I couldn't identify things. And there was one particular work, which was an aerial shot of a dried riverbed. And it just looked at Ram Kumar painting. And I said, oh my God. And they said, this is what I've been telling you for years. I can see the landscapes he paints. I have witnessed them. And that opened my kind of eyes to how we look at things. Each time Ram Kumar set out on a new body of work, he would select 4, 5, 6 tubes of color. And the discipline he had was he would restrict himself to that palette and solve all his problems within that gamut of colors and never sort of resist the temptation to introduce anything new, even though he might have felt the need for it. And that's again the aspect of discipline that I talk of. And which is why you'll notice that bodies of his work, when you see them, they have a similar palette running through for that period of time that he's sort of been painting. This was a very unusual discipline that I saw in him. And I remember once, blue wasn't a color that he used extensively when he worked in oils. It comes in when he works in acrylic. Then the blues come very strong into his work. But once I'd gone to his studio and we were looking at a body of work and I saw this very strange blue in oils. And I said, Mr. Ram Kumar, where did this color come from? I've never seen it in your work before. And he says, I was looking through my colors and there was this tube lying for years. And I said, can't go to waste, I should use it. So I decided to use this particular blue till he finished that tube. So these were quirky things about him which are quite fascinating for me, because I learned a lot from that and how different artists have different ways of working.
Ram Kumar was a lovely human being, very gentle, very soft-spoken, very frugal with everything. His words, you could see it in everything, every aspect of his life. I think it was just him, for him, less was more. And that came across in every aspect of his life, even the way he did things, or when he painted, the colors that he used, he'd be very judicious about the fact that he wouldn't want to waste any color, nothing should be left behind. And he lived a very frugal, very basic life, and he was very content in that. And that was so amazing because you don't see that anymore. Because nothing came easy to him. He had to work really, really hard to get where he got.
He started off as a figurative painter, But that's because he had very strong left leanings and was part of the Communist Party in France. He had joined it when he went there and had a lot of empathy for people. And then it was a visit with Hussain to Banaras in 1959, which in fact Ram Kumar had planned and Hussain joined in, which changed his work completely, because that's where the landscape comes in first. And gradually sort of all those sort of hillscapes come in over the years later. So the city of Banaras had fascinated Ram Kumar, and he wanted to go and live there for a while and paint. And he had a sort of rather well-to-do patron friend there who was, I think, into poetry, and he was a poet himself. And he was going to go and stay with him, and Hussain decided to join him. So both of them went, and every morning they would go out to sketch on the ghats. Both had different routines. Hussain would almost take a 100-page sketchbook and sort of keep sketching frantically through the whole day wherever he went. They parted ways. Ram Kumar would come back by lunchtime home and then sit and flesh out what he had made as kind of little preparatory notes in his sketchbooks. He'd flesh them out as more sort of formal drawings later at home, while Hussain would come late evening just having sketched. So it was an attitude difference. And that's where Hussain introduces Ram Kumar to ink and wax. So he was working a lot with ink. And he says, rub a little wax on the paper in certain areas that you want, where the ink sort of slides over the wax and creates sort of accidental texture. Some you can control, some you can't. And this was something that fascinated Ram Kumar. And that whole body of work that you see that he does around that time and a little later uses a lot of wax along with ink or watercolors. I think Hussain spent about 2 weeks there and returned. He had had enough of Banaras. Ram Kumar stayed on for I think 2 or 3 months at one stretch, and sort of the city he kept finding imagery that was, he could just go on and on and on. Okay, so there's this one painting of Ram Kumar's of Banaras. I'm not exactly sure of the date, but I think it's dated 1968, which when Hussain saw many years later, he said, this is one of Ram Kumar's finest works I have ever seen. And there's a very interesting story to this, because Richard Armstrong, the director of the Guggenheim, walked in the gallery, saw this work, and he knew nothing about Ram Kumar. He knew very little about Indian art, in fact. And he just looked at this painting and he said, this is a very smoky city. And I said, what makes you say that? He says, I don't know, that's a feel I get about this painting. And I said, you're spot on in a sense, because it's Banaras and they are the burning ghats in Banaras. But he says, this painting just gave me the impression of a very smoky city. So quite interesting, because probably exactly what Ram Kumar chose to or wanted to capture, he had conveyed to the viewer. Ram Kumar had decided he wanted to be a painter. He had a job in a bank because he had studied economics. He had done his MA in economics, but that wasn't really his calling, and he wanted to study art. So he studied art under Sailoz Mukherjee for a while in Delhi, and then finally decided to mount his own exhibition in 49, I think, in Simla at the YMCA. And the future president of India, Dr. Zakir Hussain, he wasn't president then, visited the show, had a conversation with Ram Kumar, and Ram Kumar must have expressed what he really wanted to achieve. And the prices must have been modest, about 30, 50 rupees a painting. And Dr. Zakir Hussain bought 4 works from that exhibition, which were probably his only sale from that show. And then went on to acquire some more work from him a year or so later or subsequently. And that helped him build a little corpus to go to France to study art. I remember him telling me that his dad gave him one-way ticket and said, son, don't ask me for anything more in life. So he goes by sea to France, and he's sort of helped by Raza again, where Raza says, okay, you don't have a place to stay, you use my studio as your, not residence, but you can live here. So Ram Kumar would go for morning classes and evening classes. So Raza had the space to himself all day to paint, and in the evening, Ram Kumar would sleep there. And there's one story that he told me which was so fascinating. He says he's at the studio one evening and there's a knock on the door. He opens it. There's this very sort of well-dressed French gentleman who inquires about Raza. So he welcomes him in and said, well, Monsieur Raza is not here just now, but you're welcome to wait. And the wait goes on and Raza doesn't show up. And finally, in conversation, the gentleman asks Ram Kumar, what are you doing here? So he says, oh, I'm a painter and, So let me see your work. So Ram Kumar starts showing him his work. And the gentleman buys a painting. And he's quite thrilled and he departs because Raza hasn't shown up that day and goes. The next day, Ram Kumar almost reprimands Raza. You had this appointment and you didn't keep to it. This guy waited. And Raza asked, then what happened? No, then he wanted to see my work and he bought a painting. So Raza says, that's exactly why I was hoping that would happen. And that's a story I can't believe. I really can't believe. I don't believe it would happen in today's day and age, even at that time. But that camaraderie was so strong among them. They were a group of people who had decided the only thing they could do and wanted to do was paint. And they were determined to stick by it. And that kind of determination, I don't think I would have it. So I think there was that kind of reciprocal that we've decided jointly we're going to do this and we'll do it together. So when he'd go for these evening classes, which was sort of late afternoon, early evening, Ram Kumar wouldn't take a bus, even though it was quite a distance. He would choose to walk because he'd save the bus fare. But not just that, but he says on the route that he'd take, there was a boulangerie and fresh sort of bread would be, the aroma of fresh bread would fill the space. And he says, I was so hungry, but I couldn't afford to buy bread. Even that was a luxury. So I'd take an even longer route, skirt right round it to avoid going, to get that temptation. That was the kind of determination these people had. I don't know. I honestly say hats off to them.
I think Dadiba probably mentioned the story about him walking taking the longest route to his class because he didn't want to pass the boulangerie because he was so hungry. And we heard it from him. So, you know how much he must have felt, the hunger, but yet the determination to do what he wanted to do, and that was to paint. That determination and sincerity is sometimes, I feel, lacking in today's world. Very few people go that extra mile to do that thing that they want to do. Sometimes, it takes another kind of person. Because you know that there is no fallback. You've given everything up to do this and pursue it. And they pursued it, that generation pursued it in spite of everything. They could barely make ends meet. They were really starving artists in that sense.
So in 2024, which was the birth centenary of Ram Kumar, the Pandole Art Gallery published this book, which is Sketches of Europe, which is a translation of a book published in 1950s, late 50s, called Europe Ke Sketch, which was a compilation of short essays that Ram Kumar had written on his visit to Europe in Hindi, which were published in a sort of Delhi weekly magazine, which used to be published. Then they were compiled as a book. And Brij Sharma translated the book. He had got permission from Ram Kumar before his passing away to translate it. And we finally published it in 2024. And what's very interesting is the first para in the preface that Ram Kumar writes, and I'll read it out. He said, it's an old memory. During the winters in Simla, when the schools would shut down for 3 months, and many of my classmates would leave for Delhi to escape the snow, I would find myself loitering around the whole day in the unattended gardens of locked-up bungalows, in tandem with the sons of cooks, milkmen, and shopkeepers in Kaitu. In a house close by lived a priest. Whenever I saw him heading for the temple, I would promptly extend my palm in his direction and ask him solicitously, Panditji, when will I go to Europe? Is there any line in my hand which will take me there? I still do not know how this line prophesying foreign travel appeared in my palm. I'm quite fond of the confines of my little room on the roof, and the very memory and the mention of the journey sends shivers down my spine. Even so, somehow, a time comes when a fate ordains I must travel. So this is a book which has sort of sketches that he made whilst traveling in Europe, along with his sort of stories of meeting poets, writers, and anecdotes. And it's a lovely book. I mean, it's not hugely informative, but it's hugely personal and documents a time when he traveled in the 50s to Europe. As a young, he was probably in his 20s then. Another distinct change that came in Ram Kumar's work was you never saw the ocean in his work. You saw traces of water bodies, which could have been lakes, rivers, whatever. But you never saw the ocean till he goes to New Zealand, where his son has migrated to. And suddenly you see these works where the ocean dominates the painting. So he was clearly someone who responded to what he saw. And that sort of came through in his work quite directly.
And then when he went off to New Zealand for the first time to see his son who had moved there, you saw all these colors, because the landscape was completely different. The blue of the sea, the ocean was like blue, and he was so fascinated with it. I remember him doing a large painting, and we were doing an exhibition of his. And it was the last painting that we had got. It was so incongruous in the sense with all the other works that were in the exhibition that it was bright. And I mean, everybody who walked in would say, this is really bright. And it was, yes, but that was Ram Kumar. And you could see that he was seeing the world in another way, because he spent so much of time in the hills, and he'd see, these bleak landscapes and, with the melting snows and things like that. So you'd see the rock surfaces and the melting snow. And here was all this lush green and blue.
Actually, when you think of it, Ram Kumar played a role in Hussain walking barefoot. Because Hussain and Ram Kumar were very close when Hussain, lived in Delhi and spent a lot of time there. And he'd almost invariably every day land up at Ram Kumar's home at some point. And one morning, Hussain lands up at Ram Kumar's home, and Ram Kumar tells him, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to leave. The very well-known Hindi writer Mukti Bhog had passed away." And he said, "I'm going to his funeral." Hussain had heard the name but didn't really know his writing much, but he says, "Come, even I'll come along." So he joins him, and then they're walking with the procession to the crematorium, and Hussain notices that everyone's walking barefoot. And he says, "Why am I wearing shoes?" So that's when he took off his shoes, discarded them by the wayside, and started walking barefoot with that procession. And he says, "That was a turning point in my life. I felt so good walking barefoot that I never felt the need to wear shoes again." So, Hussain would go over very often to Ram Kumar's house, invariably at around lunchtime. It was quite a routine. And one day Hussain goes over and they sit to lunch. And there's a young girl serving them. And Hussain's a little perplexed about this. But anyway, they respected each other's privacy. He didn't ask anything, nothing. And then, which was typical of Hussain right through his life, he'd have a little nap post-lunch. So he had this little cot on which he'd go to sleep. And he says, when I went there was a little note under the pillow. And Ram Kumar had written, "The lady you saw at lunch is my wife, Vimla. Please don't ask me any more questions." I mean, quite fascinating. But I can tell you one thing, that his parents made the perfect choice for him. His wife, Vimla Kumar, was a perfect companion for an artist with his temperament. She let him do exactly what he wanted, was not demanding at all, and I think, without doubt, she's had a huge role to play in his career. So Ram Kumar was someone who never really sort of engaged in criticizing or discussing any of his contemporaries or any artist's work. So if you'd ask him, you'd get a kind of a response where you knew you didn't have to push this any further. And he was like, yeah, it's good, it's nice, very good, you know. It was like, you leave me to do my work. I'm not really interested in what others are doing. I'm sort of focused on what I'm doing and I'm happy with that. And it was very rare that he got effusive about something that he saw. And I remember going to the opening show at Gallery Espace when it had opened in Delhi in the 90s. And it had a show of watercolors by Hussain based on his autobiography. And that was the one time that I saw Ram Kumar super excited about that body of work. And Krishan Khanna and Ram Kumar, like children, took me aside, showed me a painting and said, we want to buy this jointly. I mean, I'd never seen this sort of a reaction from Ram Kumar. I don't know whether they finally bought the work or not, but they were contemplating jointly buying a work and they'd put it on hold. So that was one time that I saw Ram Kumar really excited about a fellow artist's body of work. So this is a story that's been narrated to me by Ram Kumar and I'm absolutely clear about it in my head. But when I look back at dates, I just can't seem to sort of make the connect. But Ram Kumar, and I vividly remember this, says that when I believe it was New York, he says he's going to New York and as the sort of ship is sort of docking, he sees this small figure standing on the dock. And as he gets closer and closer, he recognizes him as Gaitonde. And they knew each other from Bombay, from the 50s, but they weren't great friends. So when he disembarks and he meets Gaitonde, he was surprised to see him. And he says, Gaitonde told me something. He says, do you know, when I landed here, there was no one to receive me. So when I heard you were coming, I said, at least I should come to receive you. So Ram Kumar was very happy in his own company. He didn't really need company or it didn't stimulate him excessively. I think also his long walks in the morning were also one aspect of introspection. And he spent a lot of his time with that, even in his studio. He'd sit all by himself. As I said, he wouldn't read at home. He'd even contemplate and read in his studio. Those hours were meant for just himself, to be by himself. And he didn't like too many sort of interruptions in that. Well, one could say it sort of bordered on depression, but that was his temperament and everyone we all accepted it as this is how Ram Kumar is. The one work that he bought was a sculpture by a South Indian artist in wood, chiseled in wood. And it's this kind of very compressed, narrow figure, bonded figure in bandages in a wheelchair. Now, if that's something that he could really relate to, and that's one painting he chose to acquire, he bought it from an exhibition, says a lot about how he related to life.
He never stood with his shoulders back. He always was hunched over. When he sat also, he sat with his hands between his legs like that. And yet, when you see his paintings, they have this huge expanse of space, it just takes over. Like it kind of transports you to the place that he's painting, the landscapes that he's painting, which are vast landscapes. And yet they're compressed in that small space, and yet they give you that sense of vastness, both at the same time. So he was quite wonderful like that.